Post also says that the psychological evaluation report should include any additional information reported by the evaluator to the department shall be limited to that which is necessary and appropriate, such as the candidate's job-relevant functional limitations, reasonable accommodation requirements, and the nature and seriousness of the potential risks posed by the candidate. That does seem to limit the information, doesn't it? You remember the old days when we used to do essentially a clinical report that included their developmental history, psychosexual history, I mean, sexual orientation would be discussed in the reports. I mean, there was a whole bunch of information that was included.
Childhood history?
Pardon?
Childhood history.
Childhood history? Absolutely. If we gathered it, we found a way to report it. It was just basically a data dump. And that now flies in the face of the standard of practice, and there are a number of court cases we're going to talk about in a moment that make that problematic, or cite why that's problematic. Let's go to the next one, please. Victoria?
Can I ask a post question?
Yes.
Before you move off it. First slide, your category A1. Do you ever view that as both medical and non-medical?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that has medical and non-medical components. I'm talking about emotional stability and stress resilience. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So I want to include here something that you don't have in your slide notes, and that's this comes from an article by Meyer et al., 2001, American Psychologist. It's an article on psychological assessment versus psychological testing, and this, in my view, is the article that you want to read after reading Michael Cutler's really important, I think, compelling article on actuarial assessment that's coming out in the handbook. Because this takes a different perspective, of course. This is the more nomothetic analysis. Meyer et al. Write that psychological assessment, in contrast to psychological testing, is, and I'm quoting, a complicated activity that requires sophisticated understanding of personality, psychopathology, and the many ways in which neurological disorders are manifested in cognition and behavior. Knowledge of psychological measurements, statistics, and research methods. Recognition that different assessment methods produce qualitatively distinct kinds of information. Next slide, please. Understanding of the particular strengths and limitations of each method and of different scales within each method. A capacity to conceptualize the diverse real-world conditions that could give rise to a particular pattern of test data. The ability to challenge one's judgment by systematically linking the presence and absence of test indicators to the psychological characteristics under consideration, and the interpersonal skill and emotional sensitivity to effectively communicate findings. Now, I think that that's a compelling capture of what happens in an assessment process. And they make the point that psychological testing is effectively the dumb stethoscope. It's the MRI. But it takes a physician to properly read it and interpret it. And the psychologist's role in that should properly involve that data source, but it should also include other important, rich data sources. How many times have you seen an applicant that when they get into your office, they choke? They just vapor lock. They look good on psychological testing, perhaps. Had one the other day. She comes into my office. And I ask this question routinely, not because there's any orthodoxy to the answer. It just begins the conversation as to why they want to be a police officer. And don't you wish you had a buck for everyone who said, aside from I want to help people, that they've always wanted to be?
Yes.
Now, my response to that is always the same.
I didn't ask you how long.
Exactly. I said, you know, that's a very interesting answer, but it's an answer to a question I didn't ask. I never asked you how long you wanted to be a police officer. I asked you why you wanted to be a police officer.
Hey, Dr. Corey, could you please repeat that question? We didn't hear it.
Sure. Why do you want to be a police officer? And then the answer is, because I've always wanted to be one, since I was a little kid. So it's an answer to a question not asked. So I redirect them back to the question. And so I did in her case, and she said, I don't know, 45 seconds goes by. I'm not exaggerating. And she said, because I'm a solver problem.
Solver problem.
I said, I'm sorry? She said, I'm a solver problem.
Wow.
I said, really? What is that? Oh, I mean a problem solver. Now, from that moment on, she was pretty non-functional. By the time I got to measuring cognitive functioning, digit span, she's functioning at the 5th percentile. She can't do 3 digits backwards. Just vapor lock. That's interview behavior. Shouldn't be ignored. It's relevant behavior. But it's not going to be represented in all likelihood given the data sources we have in the literature as a predictor. We've already talked about L&L versus American Airlines. We've talked about why the conditional offer of employment is considered real only when non-medical information is provided. For those of you who are interested in reading the EEOC Legal Counsel Division's response to questions from Shelley Spielberg regarding bifurcated screening, pre-offer psychological testing, I'm happy to forward it to you or direct you to where you can find it. There is a great deal of legal opinion both within EEOC and out supportive of a bifurcated model. I'm not going to try to defend it beyond what I've already cited to you. But to describe instead, for those of you who are convinced, for those of you who work with or for agencies that permit it, to discuss a model for carrying it out. At the pre-offer stage, you would include some combination of self-reported history, non-medical of course, and psychological or personality testing, non-medical of course. And this would be focused on suitability or its obverse, which is counterproductive behavior. So in the model that I use, my focus is on the risk of counterproductive behavior. It's a risk assessment. And candidates are rated as low, moderate, or high risk on the post-background dimensions. Now, I emphasize background dimensions because POST has 2 lists of screening dimensions: the background and the psych. They are almost identical in, I think, 8 of the 10, but emotional stability is not among the background dimensions because it has, as Jack suggested, a medical component to it. So it's not found in the background dimensions. So I choose to focus my assessment on the background dimensions, not the psychological dimensions, although the overlap between them is very, very tight, very close. But they're both listed on the POST website, so you can find both. The other reason for that is it ensures that there's no bleed over of the medical component, and it uses the same language that the background investigators are accustomed to using. And I rate, based upon the evidence available to me at the pre-offer stage, low, moderate, or high risk. Now, how do I get that? I get that through a combination of self-reported background information, and my method for using that is the Johnson-Roberts PHQ pre-offer version. There are other ways to accomplish that. Mike Cutler uses, I think, online. He developed online PHQ. It's another actuarial-based model for non-medical pre-offer bifurcated screening. Also incorporates, I think, the CPI, as does my methodology and Mike's. Then, for those who are rated as low or moderate risk, who receive a full background investigation, who are ultimately given a conditional offer of employment and proceed to the post-offer psychological examination, they receive an examination which is medical and non-medical in nature. Now you may be thinking, well, why in a bifurcated model would I not just focus on the medical? Because this is the first time I will have laid eyes on this person. This is the first time we will have interacted. So there is going to be this kind of job-relevant behavior that I saw in the example I just gave you with Miss Solver Problem. And I would not have been able to capture that. I didn't capture that in the pre-offer. She had a pre-offer examination. Should I say, well, that's not medical behavior, so I should ignore it? Well, no more than if they, came in and mooned my secretary. That's non-medical behavior too, but I'm not going to ignore it.
Neither is your secretary.
Neither is excuse me, my administrative assistant. She would be offended if I called her a medical, administrative assistant. She says, I'm a secretary. She actually does shorthand. So it is focused at the post-offer stage on medical and non-medical. It's focused on suitability and stability, and it includes a clinical interview as well as testing for pathology. I don't do additional testing of a non-medical nature.